Hello, and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about running tabletop role-playing games. Each episode, we randomly pick a topic on our D10 table of topics and discuss it. My name is Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
And this week, we're joined by special guest, David Freeze.
Hello. Good to be here.
Hey, welcome on to the podcast.
Thanks.
Yeah, so David, why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of your history with gaming? I guess, how did you get into tabletop games, and I guess, what are you playing these days?
Well, it goes back to the 19th century, actually.
Okay.
1975, I guess, or 76, right around the time when basic Dungeons & Dragons was coming out. And I was in the 7th grade, and I had a friend of mine who said, we just need to try this new game. His bigger brother was trying it, and I said, I'd love to try it. It only took one time, and for some reason, the whole idea of medieval warfare always just resonated with me, and when I played it one time, I was hooked. Went from the basic expert edition, and then finally the advanced D&D came out, and I've just kind of been hooked on that ever since.
So who was in that original party that was playing?
A friend of mine, Keith, was part of that, and we had another guy, Greg. There was about 5 of us that was playing. When we first started, I kind of, I don't know why, but I ended up being the DM. So no one else wanted to do it. In fact, Keith and I still play today. We play every 2 so I guess it's like 30 years later or so, but we'll play every 2 weeks on Thursday night. We'll kind of get together, and it's a couple people that I don't know, but they're all over the United States, and we get together and play on Skype. Kind of nice to still get in touch with some of the people that you played with for many years ago. That's
fantastic. Do you still are you still typically the GM?
I haven't been the GM for this. They're actually playing Hackmaster, so
nice.
I kind of like to just play a little bit. With my particular game, I do all the GMing, or what we call the lore mastering, and so it's kind of nice to be a player every now and then, get to bother the GM a little bit.
You're one of the first people I've met who plays Hackmaster. I've got a copy of that as well, and I played it a good bit in the past, but not recently. Do you enjoy playing it, or you could take it or leave it?
It's a learning curve. I mean, there's some aspects of it that I actually don't have the rules. I mean, so they just said, here, create the character, start playing this. So I roll, and typically what we have is kind of a hack and slash, kind of a dungeon crawl. I like more political intrigue and doing storylines and stuff like that. But most of what we're doing is just kind of sitting around talking to each other. I mean, we roll the dice. They tell me what all is going on as far as the percentages and things like that. I need to learn more about the particular game, but it's just hard to learn every RPG that's out there. So.
Yeah. It's funny. I think there's something about being a GM that when you get to be a player, you're like, I'll just let them handle the rules.
It is very easy to do, and I really enjoy that sometime. All the pressure is off of me at that time.
So do you play in any other games? I think you mentioned you're running a game of lore.
I have lore. That's the one I had created. Run that usually about almost once every 2 weeks as well. We have people from the area that I didn't even know played, but they come together. We have about 5 of us that get together and play lore. It gives me an opportunity to test out the rules, and I'm always constantly changing some things because it's like, that's overpowered, that's underpowered. In fact, I like the leading of it because the first time I ever played lore as a player, on the first roll, my character died. And I thought, this is just unfair. So I changed that rule real quick as to how you can die so easily. It just happened that someone rolled a 20 and someone rolled another 20, and I think it was 3 20s in a row that was rolled, and I ended up having a terminal hit against me, and I died. I didn't even get to play anymore. That was the first round, first time. It was very sad. So
that's brutal.
It's terrible.
So yeah, you mentioned that you've created lore. Do you want to give us the 30-second lowdown on what is a lore role-playing game, and what were you kind of aiming for? What sort of experience were you aiming for when you decided to create your own game?
Sure. Lore is a fantasy role-playing game, and the idea behind it is after I had played D&D, I played Pathfinder, different editions and things of that nature, I found that there were some rules that were kind of missing, it seemed to me. There was some aspect of the game. So what I created in lore is it's an RPG that allows you to do basic attacks like pretty much any of the other rest of them will let you do, but it has a lot of customization. You can do some special type of attacks that you use encounter points, so you're able to kind of boost the distance your fireball can go, how much damage it can do, the area of effect. Same thing with martial attacks. A lot of those things you can customize, but you only get so many points to spend. And also I customized the armor. So there's 8 different regions on the body, so you can have leather pads and chainmail pads on your shoulders. You can have a certain kind of helmet, so you can completely customize your armor. It even has a crafting system. There's a lot of different things you can do. You can do counter spells, but I tried to make sure that the rules were very simple to get into. In fact, right now it's about 420 pages long, but most of that it's all background information. You read 8 pages and you know how to play the game.
That's great.
In fact, if you could jump in the game within 3 minutes and play it. I've had a chance to run it several years since 2009 at Gen Con, and everyone who sits down, I mean, whether they're a seasoned gamer or they're brand new to it, they take to it very quickly, and they've enjoyed it. It's been fun to do. I could have either watched TV for the last 3 years, or I could have kind of done the bucket list and wrote an RPG, so I was able to write the RPG.
Yeah.
So,
it's really impressive that you have produced lore, to the extent that you have. I think most game masters, in my experience, do have at some point in their game mastering life that bug to make a system. But not too many people go all the way across the finish line on it. So, so nice work.
And part of my motivation was I wanted to do some writing. I thought, well, I don't really know the world, so I thought I have to create the world, and now I don't know all the different vocations. So the rule system that I created, all the 450 pages with the races and the different skill sets and all that, was kind of a backdrop for me just to write the novel. I just need to get around to writing the novel now. I haven't started. I'm so tired, and I don't know if I'll ever write it, but if I do, it's ready to go. So all my background material's done.
That's a heck of a setting Bible that you've got there.
So within the rule book, then, are there short stories about people in that world? Like, how much of the setting have you fleshed out?
I created the rules to be completely world agnostic. So except for the religious system, I mean, we have 8 different houses that are part of the religious system, and they have a little bit of a background, but it could be set into any world. Other than that, people can apply the rule system. I mean, I think they probably can apply it to Pathfinder and D&D if they wanted to, kind of an alternate, kind of homebrew rules. I really tried to make it as world agnostic as possible. I'm now creating what's called a legendarium. That is all the background of a world, and the world is called Candlewood. So if people wanted to use that, they could, but it's completely, it's an election if they want to do that.
You've mentioned that you've spent a lot of time at conventions running games, a lot of lore, and I remember from some previous discussions with you that you've run some Pathfinder and other stuff at conventions. Do you enjoy that? Do you get a kick out of running at conventions?
Oh, I do. I love sitting down at a table. I mean, one of the ideas that people have about people who are gamers are like they're kind of antisocial. But if you sit down at a table at a con, you find that, here's people that have come from sometimes all over the world, but at least all over the United States. And within 5 minutes, they're trying to solve a problem that you've given to them, and they're working together. And a lot of times they never met anyone else at the table. So it's just a wonderful experience. Also, I love the challenge that I can run the same quest with 3 different groups, and it always ends up different. The things that they throw at me are things that's like I never would have thought about someone doing that. It keeps me on my toes, and I kind of like to do it loosely if you're doing if you're gaming something, to really let the story, let the people kind of do what they want to do.
What cons are on your radar in the next 6 months or so?
Hoping to go to Origins, possibly go to Dragon Con in Atlanta. Origins, I think, is in Cleveland or Cincinnati. I'm not sure which one that is. It starts with a C, in June. But the big one is always Gen Con. I love going down there, and I've had a chance to go every year since 2009, which is kind of when I started. I ran lore, but I also ran Pathfinder. It's interesting to watch the evolution of that. There were like 200 people that were in the room. Now there's 3,000 people. It's amazing how it's grown. In the Pathfinder room, you mean? Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a massive. They had a small little presence on the side. No, there wasn't that many people there, but now it's all encompassing. Well, we should dive into kind of our main topic. Yeah, you bet. If you are familiar with the show, you know that in each episode we randomly determine the topic that we will be discussing. And we do that by asking our guest to roll a D10, which hopefully David has brought, and I think he has. So, David, do you have a D10 handy? And is this a special D10 with a little bit of history that you want to share with us? Well, I was looking in my drawer. I actually found one that was from the Expert Rules that goes back to about, I guess, 1982 or so. And so this is an old dice, but I can still see the numbers on it. Rounded off quite a bit, but I can still see the numbers. Is it an inked die? No, it's not inked. This one, I didn't have to do that. I had a set that was inked way back then. They didn't turn out very well, so I decided just to go with the ones that are printed on, easy to see. Navy blue with white numbers.
Okay, well, go ahead and give us a D10 roll. No modifiers.
Okay, 2.
All right. The topic that your die roll has determined we will be discussing is how do you determine the power level of your game? Are your players normal people or demigods? And how do you handle player disagreements about this? This topic was added way back in the 5th episode of this podcast by our guest, Mark French. So, Chris, do you remember this conversation with Mark? And do you remember any context he added to this question?
Yes, I do remember this because this one really struck me as a good question. So he was particularly talking, I think, in terms of rifts, which is a system I'm not super familiar with, but right, it sounded like there was sort of like normal damage and then like super damage or mega damage, something like that. The question sort of came out of that discussion, I think, and it was, how do you determine sort of like how hard a punch is going to hit in your game, right? So if your characters are heroes, that's great. When they swing the sword, is like, do they rip heaven in half or do they just like chop an apple in half? The other point to that is, how do you handle the players sort of disagreeing, like, oh no, like my guy can jump 50 feet, when someone wants like something a little bit more realistic than that.
Mm-hmm. This could also be referring a bit to just the general power scale of your game or your setting. A D&D can scale from, hard scrabbling scoundrels up to demigods, and what's the sweet spot? Why don't we start with a general question, and that is, what is the power level? What's the scale of the games you guys are either running right now or that you most typically run?
Yeah, so I'm playing D&D right now. I think the way that I've sort of determined it is just, based on sort of the rules of D&D, right? So D&D, I think, like, as you progress in the level system, it kind of gives you some markers about, like, the sorts of enemies that you should be able to take down and fight. Things like that. So you start at level 1 and you're just facing goblins, and by the time you're level 20, it's like you are facing gods. Like that's sort of the progression that they want you to take. And I think there's a lot of reasons just to stick with that if you're going to play D&D. Yeah, so I've played other games, right, where the power level's a lot lessened, right, because like maybe you're just like totally normal human beings, so walking across the room might be dangerous, that sort of thing.
In mine, I guess I'm playing lore, but I do play D&D some as well. 5th edition. I know a lot of the rule systems will kind of set people more as heroes. That idea that you kind of start out as a hero. What I typically try to do is let people start out really as normal human beings. I mean, if you're starting out as a fighter, you haven't really fought. I mean, you're brand new to this. So at least within lore and some of the other games I've been, you kind of measure that by you have less life points or less hit points. You're easier to hit. Your armor class, you don't have as much money to spend on. Not everyone's wearing chainmail or something like that. So especially if you're a wizard, you really are kind of squishy. You can do some stuff, but as you advance and as you grow, you get tougher. You're able to hit more. I mean, your attack bonuses go up. I just kind of let people start out as regular humans and say, okay, we're kind of moving from here. One of the things that I have done is I've created creatures that are levelable. You may encounter a goblin that's first level, but just like a fighter can increase a goblin can increase to 20th level. I mean, they have the ability to do some of the same combat. So I've kind of let the players know, if you meet a goblin, it doesn't mean that it's first level. It could be 5th level, and if you're 4th, you need to watch out. So, but I try to gauge it a lot on, just the people I'm playing with. I know some people, they want to make sure, do you have rations if you're going out? I usually don't try and track that because it just seems to me it's a lot of hassle. Gets in the way of the story, but some people, they like that. So I kind of play their abilities and what they have to do kind of based on what they're looking for.
I don't play with like encumbrance rules at all, and I've had players sort of abuse that, and just kind of hits the point where they're like, "Well, how many swords are in the room?" I'm like, I don't care. Like you can have all the swords if you want. Like, no one's gonna. I'll tell you right now, no one's gonna buy them.
Now, if I'm at a con, I usually give a lot of stuff away like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I will say you get it's a plus 18 staff of hitting or smiting or lightning bolt or something. It's like you never get to use it again in my game, but
I would love one day to see some sort of official quiz or some sort of semi-official quiz and get some data on what rules most GMs just simply drop or ignore. Like, and I think things like encumbrance would be way up there. I know I've encountered so few GMs that really get into encumbrance, and I'm not bagging on people that do the encumbrance thing. That's all good.
It's a style of play.
It's a style thing. Encumbrance, things like, food and exhaustion and disease, stuff like that.
I've had a GM one time that even monitored how often you went to the bathroom.
Oh my!
When did your character go to the bathroom? And I'm thinking, who cares? But for him, that was very, very important. I thought I didn't stay in that group very long. So
yeah.
That's one of those. You're at a con game and the GM starts talking about your bathroom schedule, and you're like, "Yeah, I'm going to go up and get a drink and just never come back."
It would be a terrible game. A terrible game to be in. You only got 2 hours or 4 hours to play, and if you're going to worry about that kind of stuff, it's not going to be a good experience.
Yeah. What about you, Andy? How do you do this?
Usually my default is the kind of D&D standard expectations. Right now I'm playing in a game of the One Ring, or I'm running a game of the One Ring, which is a Tolkien-based role-playing game, and it is a little different for me because the characters are starting out as, level 1 schmucks, the way they do in D&D. However, the clear intent of the system is that they become movers and shakers, not necessarily in a mechanically powerful way, but the clear intent is that over the course of a campaign, your characters really influence and shape the area that they're adventuring in, and including, they get involved in local politics and they become revered local heroes. I have been giving some thought, since it's not a game where you really level up and your numbers get a lot bigger, I have to convey that rise in power level of the players by giving them, I guess, more influence in the areas where they're operating. And that's been kind of interesting for me. It's different. I'm really used to you all start at level 1 and you kind of, through hard work and perseverance, you pull yourself up into the mid-levels, and eventually you become kind of a heavy hitter simply because you know more magic than anybody else on the continent. But so I guess I am in slightly unexplored territory for me as a GM at the moment.
That's kind of interesting. I'm thinking about, did Frodo level up, as he was carrying the ring? It's sort of an odd concept if you think about the story of the Lord of the Rings.
It is, yeah. And, because Frodo does level up in the sense that he becomes more mature. He becomes a figure worthy of, he earns the respect of his peers. And by the end of the Lord of the Rings, he is this really grown into his heroic role. And it's a far cry from where he started way back at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. But that's certainly not in the sense that he now has a plus 35 sword attack, right?
Yes.
This reminds me a little bit that the history of Lord of the Rings role-playing games actually struggles with the question of power level, because the key question when making really any licensed role-playing game, but Lord of the Rings is a particularly good example, is what power level are the players? In when you sit down to make a Lord of the Rings game or a Star Wars game or whatever, are your characters, equal in influence and power and ability to the heroes of that movie or book? Are they Aragorn, or are they random dude in the tavern, with 7 hit points, just operating on the fringes and staying well outside the zone of the big heroes of the setting, And the different Middle-earth role-playing games over the years have landed in different spots in answering that question. But the earliest one it tried to level out all the different characters from the Lord of the Rings, and it creates some wonky questions because, is Frodo, a 17th level rogue? Is he, is Gandalf a 55th level wizard with a little bit of cleric thrown in? But yeah. Have you guys ever played or run a game that doesn't follow that 0 to hero D&D style progression?
I've played Lord of the Rings. I had a chance to play that one of the last cons I was at, and it is a very different type of game. When I'm running a game, I'll generally give my people renown points, trying to measure that with the people that they're fighting. So if they do good things, they get positive renown. If they do bad things, they get negative renown. And that, in addition to kind of your level, shows your influence in the area. People that have like a minus 500 renown, they're pretty much scoundrels. People will kind of get out of their way. I mean, they're considered people that'll cut your throat. But if you have a positive 500, you may also get free food at the tavern, or sometimes you get more information. So level is not everything. Your reputation, you're building a positive or negative reputation, and that can affect the character play.
Dave, you mentioned earlier that you liked games that focused on stuff like political intrigue. And I'm just curious if you've ever run or if you've thought about running a game where the players are like the political movers and shakers in the world. They're not rough and tumble adventurers, but they're the princes, the nobles, the merchants in the court. Have you ever done something on that scale? I
have created in the world that I'm working right now with that idea of politics. I'm kind of waiting for the characters to get a little bit higher up. So they start with a region, a town, usually something kind of small. Even in the town of Covenant that I created, it's a large town of maybe 10,000 people. So this has that structure of being lords, ladies in the political system. I'm trying to move their players to be able actually to experience some of those things. Some of them have developed, their own tavern. They say, hey, I've got some money. I want to develop a tavern. They can make money, and that can give them some influence. And, they're encountering other different political factions that are coming in, so that kind of draws them into some of that stuff. But I do like that idea of, it's not just you start from zero to go to hero, but some of these other the storyline I think is tremendous. If you can add a storyline to something, I had one game one time where we never rolled dice for 4 hours. The entire night was just political intrigue. I mean, people were movers and shakers and trying to get things done, and everyone had a blast.
Do you find, is it hard then to resolve conflict then when you don't really have sort of a mechanical, like, you have +3 to backdoor dealings or something like that?
I mean, I know like in lore we have streetwise and we have, diplomacy, and most of the games have those types of skills. So I let people use them, maybe their intellect or their appeal or something like that. You got your charisma and other different game systems, but if people are trying to do something, I usually will let them roll the dice. I find that a lot of people, they really enjoy rolling dice. They don't want just someone to tell them what's happening, but it's like, I want to somehow roll this D20 that's in front of me as much as I can. Yeah. So I set up things, whether it's combating people, when people are in a bar and you're going to have a bar fight, I let them go ahead and they do their damage, but I do something a little different, kind of like, they have what I call non-lethal damage. So once you've reached your full life points or hit points, a person has beat you up, you're basically incapacitated. Those types of things have helped to add some of that political intrigue. And I mean, there's always the person who says, I'm going to kill the other player. And I think, you can if you want to, but we're going to roll initiative. And if you want to destroy each other, you technically have that right. I give them freedom as much as they want. I try not to let my story overshadow their playing. I give them a nuts and bolts kind of, here's an outline, you have to fill in the rest of the story. And I've been in games where I had one guy, he said, I'm in the middle of a town, and I was walking forward, and he said, a wolf jumps out. And I said, is there any grass? He says, no, it's level. I said, I didn't see that. A wolf that's 10 feet in front of me? He said, no. I said, but can I at least check? He said, sure. I rolled a 20. He said, you still didn't see it. I said, It's automatic. But his story was more important than my decisions. And I thought, we're kind of like, we're seconds here. And I didn't like that. I thought that's not a good way to play.
The GM power level can be a totally different topic.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you allow that political intrigue, you have to be able to really go with it, because the story can go all over the place. There's so many directions that I want to go here. And if you haven't planned for it, it's a lot of just by your wits of saying, let me answer what comes up. And you have to really kind of, it's a dangerous thing. It can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing.
It was maybe a decade ago or even more. Was the first time I was really shaken out for the first time of the assumption that if I was playing fantasy, I was playing in this, D&D style 0 to hero thing. And I ran and played in some games of Exalted. Are you guys familiar with that?
No.
It was, it's a White Wolf game. It was quite popular. It was a quite big deal when it came out around the turn of the century, and it's had a couple of editions since then. But it was, in a sense, a sort of reaction to D&D, and its basic premise was that you are characters in a fantasy world, but you aren't the level 1 dude with 7 hit points. You are demigods who there's only a small number of things in this whole world that are as powerful as you, and you're going to wreck or save or totally rework the whole setting just by virtue of who you are. So the whole game was skewed to this power level of, you're not fighting like a band of goblins. You're fighting an army of goblins. I had a lot of fun with it at the time. It was fun to indulge in that. These days I'm back down in kind of the more standard D&D approach. It's a good exercise if you've been running games you start, as a first level wimpy character and you slowly get better. If you've been running that forever, there's a number of games out there that just let you toy with having the player start out as the really big heavy hitters. And it's a nice change of pace.
Yeah. Would you do, in that game in Exalted, would you would you be battling other demigods and stuff, or really would it be like you're taking an entire army of goblins?
The intent is that you are pretty quickly interacting with or fighting the other heavy hitters of the setting. The game really doesn't want you to bog down too much in the lower level stuff. What I found running it is that at that power level, it introduces this whole new challenge to running a game, which is that when players are empowered at that level, you lose a lot of your game master ability to kind of constrain and predict what they're going to do. If they're a demigod and they can fly across the continent and attack the emperor or start a trade war, if they have the ability to do that, in a normal D&D game, you can put a lot of really easy constraints on players because they're not that powerful. But the more powerful they get, and this isn't true in D&D too. I find D&D in starting at about level 15, I find it gets really challenging to GM because the power level is such that players are really unpredictable in what they can do. You just really need to be on your toes as GM.
Yeah, I think there's also a problem, I think, in the game. It's like, what is even their problem then at that point? Like, why are they dealing with it and not, the other local hero in town? So it does have to, I think you just have to keep on ratcheting up, like, what you're dealing with, and then all of a sudden you have interplanar conflict, which is cool, right? Exactly what you're saying. But it's very different from where we're going in the Goblin Cave.
And what I find with D&D type games is that as the players level, as they become more powerful, it pays to, adjust the type of challenge they're facing. I mean, you can have them at level 18 fighting the 18th level version of your of what they were fighting at level 1 or 2. But with their powers and stuff, you can throw them different types of challenges, if you still want to be cruising through dungeons, killing things and taking their stuff at level 18, that's awesome. But, players at that level, they can be breaking kingdoms or setting up their own kingdoms if they want. Yeah, it's a challenge though. This makes me think, have either of you guys run a superhero role-playing game? I ask because that's a type of role-playing game where you have to kind of decide right up front, like, are we playing Superman heroes or are we playing, somebody much lower on the the scale?
Were you going to say Batman? You were going to say Batman.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Batman sucks. No, Batman doesn't suck, but... have you guys played or run in superhero games or other games where you had to decide up front, like, okay, where are we going to be on the spectrum?
I personally have not done any of the superhero games, and I do that on purpose because it's that high-end part of the game that I don't really like myself. I love for me, I love the first levels. I think part of DMing is about balance. You have to always help I try not to keep my players at level 1 very long. Usually within the first, whenever they do their first adventure, they're automatically going to be level 2. I just make sure that happens. And I let them progress until they get to about level 8 to 10, and then things kind of slow down a little bit more because you're having to really develop your character. But I think even the adventures you bring them on can significantly kind of hamstring them becoming all powerful, but it gives them, here's a lot of that, the quest that you did on this week. What you find may work with something that you do in a month from now. And you're always having to think, how are all these different quests and societies I'm meeting and people and prophecies, all these things that you're kind of interweaving into the story. Where is all that going? And sometimes you have to have a real big picture before you start leading them on a quest, or at least be a couple steps ahead of them. I think even magic items, what kind of magic items you give to your players, that can determine whether they or become all powerful. But as a DM, I always try to think, I never let them become godlike. So I guess that's why the superhero never really appealed to me, because I think if you can destroy, buildings and all this kind of stuff, it kind of loses the fun for me. I know for some people they love that, but I like kind of getting there.
I'm totally with you. I've often thought about this, but my sweet spot for running D&D type games is levels like 6 to 12, because in that level range, the players are capable and they have a pretty versatile array of spells, abilities, and they're no longer at risk of freak accidents, or a goblin with a really good roll, taking them down. But like, as you say, Dave, they're not so powerful that they introduce that whole new set of questions, which is like, how do I challenge a group of demigod level characters here? How about you, Chris? Do you have kind of a sweet spot when you run D&D that you kind of linger in?
I was thinking about this as you were talking, and I don't really play tabletop games for like the power fantasy part of it, I guess. Like if there is a power fantasy, it's sort of like the overcoming the odds sort of power fantasy, not the like I punched so hard you went through all the buildings power fantasy. Yeah, so for me, like I actually really enjoy those kind of first couple levels where you have to be a bit more strategic. That said, like my D&D game, they're all at level 5 or so now, and I'm finding it very interesting. I'll use the word interesting to prepare combat encounters for them, just because it's like they just have so many options, right? And then like I forgot that the fighter can now takes 2 attacks every turn, and like the wizard has a familiar, like all this sort of stuff. So like D&D for me then kind of becomes a more of like I'm gonna flip through the monster manual and just like pick out the right challenge rating and just like see what you do with it. Which that can be kind of fun too from a GM's perspective, right? You're less sort of guiding them and more sort of like just presenting challenges and seeing what comes of it. Have
either of you guys ever had to do a course correction where you maybe by giving out magic items or through some other contrivance, you found that the player power level was above where you wanted it to be and you were struggling to challenge them in the way you wanted? Like, did you give them a +5 sword when they were level 2 and it caused all sorts of chaos?
No, so I came to GMing late, like as an adult, right? So I have learned from everybody's teenage experience where they have those stories, and I have managed to avoid that as much as possible. Yeah. Maybe to my detriment, right? Because like I have ideas for cool magical weapons. I'm just like, well, I can't give them that because they'll break it in some way.
How about you, Dave? Have you ever had to course correct?
Oh yes, yeah, I've done that a couple times. Gave one particular individual, they were fighting this particular type of a magical lizard, and they decided it was a very difficult battle, and they decided we're just going to skin it and use it for armor because it had such a high armor rating, and it went completely unbalanced. So I had to course correct that by he eventually lost that armor, or at least it got tattered. I've had sometimes people have too powerful of something, a particular axe or a bow or something, and sometimes things get stolen. It just happens.
But it's a shame that it gets stolen.
But yeah, I mean, I think you're always working with that. I mean, you're always gauging the table to find out where people are, and it's not only in the long run as far as how powerful they are. If they are too powerful, how do you adjust that? But even at the table, are they doing? Is this really a cakewalk for them? Yeah. I've completely redesigned the monsters to say, all of a sudden they're hitting really hard and doing a lot of damage, and I kind of keep up where the players are, but there's that macro and that micro adjustments that you have to make all the time.
That's a really interesting point, Dave. Do you guys, when you run games, and especially kind of combat encounter type situations, do you feel an obligation to give the players a challenge equal to their abilities? If you see that they are plowing through the opposition, do you think to yourself, well, they deserve it, I'm going to let them keep doing this, even though these combats are not all exciting? Or do you say, I really need to like bump up these encounters, and do you on the fly ramp up the challenge to meet them? How much on the fly like tweaking do you do like that?
I'm starting to do more. I do like to adjust things as it's going. Just simple stuff, like all of a sudden something will have 20 more hit points or something like that, just because it's like it's going to go down next round unless unless I do something.
Are you doing that because you think it won't be fun if it doesn't have another 20 hit points? Like, what's going through your mind when you are like, I'm going to just have this guy's hit points be doubled?
Well, that's a deep and probing question.
I know. I'm putting you on the spot, Chris.
Yeah. So, I mean, fun is a very subjective thing, but I think it is not fun. I'm sure we've talked about this a bunch on the podcast. It's not fun to me when you hit the point in a battle where you're sort of just doing what you did the last time to win. So if the last time to win, if all you did was just everybody did their attack, you kind of like circled around the enemy and did your attacks until they went down, like, then something's wrong, right? So you got to kind of break out of that rut. That's fun in video games. It's not fun in tabletop games to me. So that's why I would adjust and fudge and maybe try to throw another enemy in there to make it so like they get to use their cool powers and not just rely on attacking every turn.
Yeah, I've done the same thing, especially like at conventions. I mean, of course, if you're going to demo your game at a convention, you don't want your players to die. It's a negative experience. Yeah. No one ever dies at my table, and there's a reason for that. But even in my own personal games, I'm constantly trying, I guess, because I see myself as the storyteller, and I want people to have fun. But I don't want them just to sit there and say, hey, I can just kill anything. There has to be a little bit of fear that says, I went down, I only got like a couple hit points left, or life points, and there's some fear in there. It kind of energizes them, I think. So I've actually just, the life points or the hit points of a creature really don't mean anything to me. I'm gauging how many rounds have we gone through? Are people having a good time? You're constantly always monitoring where people are around the table. I'll find a person that they're not rolling at all very good for the night. They're always rolling 2 and 3 and 1. They're getting beat up, and I'll sometimes, make something happen that they can actually have fun. And I'll do the same thing to the person who's rolling 20s all night. And they get a little cocky, and it's like, okay, we need to kind of bring you down a couple notches. But, I've been known to introduce brand new monsters in encounter. They had no idea where they were coming from. And it's just like, okay, let's make it a little bit harder. But I've also been able to say, you've beat on this monster enough. I'm going to let it die now. And because you can tell when people they're kind of getting bored. And you just want to say, okay, the counter's over. We need to move the next part of the story. So there's always that judgment. You're always trying to monitor what's going on.
I feel that so much of successfully running a game is circling around that question of like, what is really fun here? Is it the challenge? Is it the strategy? Is it more fun if they're, down to their last couple hit points and the tension is high? Is it more fun that they're getting to use their awesome powers and just wipe the floor with these opponents, And it's different for every group. And I don't know. One day I'll figure out the answer to that question. But until then, I feel like you have to just be prepared to do a lot of quick adjustments on the fly.
And I think it's all of them. I mean, you're constantly letting them show their powers and they're epic. You're also getting some tension. And I think within the concept of the context of a 2-hour game, you can have those highs and lows. But a lot of it is just, how are the people interacting with each other? Are they laughing? Are they enjoying themselves? And that's part of the entertainment. And I know some GMs will say that's not at all what the game's about. You got to know when the person goes to the bathroom and did they eat this morning and how many calorie counts do they have. But I see a bigger picture. I just think people enjoy getting together and playing.
Yeah, Dave, you mentioned earlier you mentioned the idea of the characters losing something overpowered that they had acquired, and it made me laugh. It made me think of a power destabilizing element that has cropped up into my games from time to time, and that is when players get too wealthy. Do you guys ever have this problem? I was playing in a game a couple of years ago, and it's just so easy as the game master, to let the players accumulate too much wealth, and there's various reasons why it's easy to fall into that trap. But you can quickly reach a point where the characters have a lot of power because they have a lot of wealth and influence. And I remember a GM of a game I was playing in took me aside in between sessions, and he's like, you guys got all that treasure a couple of sessions ago, and I'm really starting to regret it, because we had started doing things like purchasing whole sailing vessels and things like that really were throwing the power curve of the game out of whack. And he was like, so I want you to have a last party with this money at the next session, because you're going to lose it through a contrived GM thing in about one episode, in about one adventure. So just brace yourself. And that kind of made me laugh, and I appreciated the bluntness of him just saying, "Hey, I gave you something, a toy that is taking some of the fun of the game away from me, the GM. So let's try to get this back balanced." I don't like that. It's pretty cheesy to steal the player's stuff or just to take it away, but sometimes you got to do it.
That's where taxes come in. If they have a lot of money, taxes come down on people, and it's like, you got to pay the tax.
Yeah, some king's going to ask, how did they get all those gold pieces?
that is, I would love a game that actually went down that direction. What do you do with these rogue adventurers running around with the wealth of a small nation, in the form of magic items? Of course, your IRS has to be able to deal with like an angry party of 12th level, like marauders, basically. All right, you guys have any final thoughts on the topic of kind of managing the power level in games?
Yeah, I do. So one way that I've kind of played with the power level, and this is something I've only done once, I kind of want to explore it again, was running a session and the players had just reached level 3, which in D&D you get a bunch of your class stuff at level 3. And so the wizard, the first time that he cast one of his new spells, I had it like get cast at like a 5th level spell, right? Like, so it was just way too powerful. Like, there's no way that he could have really been capable of doing this. We had a really fun like role playing moment, like, hey, you've just discovered sort of this new thing that you can do, and it just like blasted the whole forest apart. It's like it's not going to happen again for a long time, but right, you can kind of see like this is where you're headed if you continue down this path.
Yeah, that's interesting. So he had to find a way more to like bring that power under his control.
Yeah, it was like not exactly like a wild surge or wild magic, but yeah, it was just sort of like the first time he cast, I think it was Thunder Wave, right, and which is only supposed to be a 15 by 15 foot cube or something like that. Yeah. But instead it blasted like 100 feet in every direction. So it was like really fun because it's like, well, yeah, you did just learn this cool thing, and like maybe you don't understand it, and like maybe it's like, yeah, coming from something you don't quite get. But yeah, so I mean, like that, right? Mechanically in the game, it happened in a section that didn't really matter, right? It wasn't like he used this against a boss and destroyed the boss in one hit. Yeah. Something like that. It was just like, in the forest, taking down a goblin. Yeah, so like I think playing with that as the GM, you can do some interesting things too with I guess where you show that power level spiking.
I'm reminded of not a role-playing game, but the Metroid video games. Mm-hmm. Are you guys familiar with those? Chris, I know you're familiar with those.
Yeah.
Well, the one of the conceits of Metroid is that in at least the Metroid Prime games, you often start with all of the power-ups or a lot of the powers that you will acquire in the course of the game. Like in Metroid Prime 1, this is a while ago. I'm going to get details wrong. But you start with like most of the power-ups, right? And then you have this short like tutorial session where you get to enjoy and see how awesome it is going to be to have all of these power-ups. And then the game, through a plot contrivance, takes all those power-ups away from you. And then you spend the rest of the game slowly getting those powers and items back. But from a player perspective, it was fun. It was a thrill. I just bought this game. I plugged it in. And it's a thrill to get to be the ultimate version of your character, and to have all these tools at your disposal. And it also, you don't mind too much when they take it away because you understand that this is maybe a little overpowered. But you have had this fun glimpse of like, this is where I'm going to be if I keep at this game. And I've never thought of applying that in like a role-playing tabletop game, but now I'm kind of intrigued.
I think like one thing, I'm going to turn this into a Metroid podcast for a minute, but one thing that's really fascinating to me about the Metroid Prime example that you brought up is, like video games do this all the time, right? But Metroid Prime does it really well. It takes it away, but then when you collect all those things, you still get more on top of that. So it's like, even though you were this super powerful bounty hunter, lost everything, you end up like in a much further place than even where you started, right? As that powered up. Yeah, which I just think is like, it's a clever way to do it because it gives you a goal right at the beginning. It's like, I want to get back to where I was. And then you find out that really, no, actually what you wanted to do was get much further than that.
Yeah. And, in literature too, it's not an uncommon trope that the player starts out on the top, or the hero starts out at the top, and then they have some sort of setback that knocks them all the way down to the bottom. They lose their power. They're kicked out of the royal palace, whatever it is. and then the actual meat of the movie was not that fun exercise of power at the beginning, but it's the much more interesting regaining through effort and perseverance of the powers that were lost. I've never done that with an RPG, started the players out in a really high spot and then knocked them down to the bottom and then had them climb back up. But if players were kind of up for that, I think that would be a really interesting tabletop experience. All right, well, hey, shall we wrap things up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Okay. Dave, it has been great having you on the show, and you've talked a bit about lore. Can you tell people where they would go to find out a little bit more about lore or to pick up a copy of their own?
Right now, we're currently selling it as a PDF download and as a print book on DriveThruRPG. So if you go to DriveThruRPG and just type in lore RPG or lore fantasy role-playing game, you'd find the book there. So currently we have the core rules, but the Creature Codex is coming out, and as I said, the Legendarium is being worked on. So it's a slow process, but we're getting them out.
And as you mentioned before, you're going to be at a lot of cons running games of lore. So if people are interested, or if they want to stop by and say hi, look for lore events at Gen Con, Origins, etc. David, I think the final thing we need to do here is we will invite you to replace the topic we just discussed on our random table of topics with a new one of your choice. So with the understanding that some future guest may get stuck discussing it, do you have a topic or question you want to add to the table?
I do. I was thinking about it today. Really, how do you use history, medieval history, ancient history, to inform your quest and your gaming in your tabletop?
Oh, that's fantastic.
So, wow. I mean, it's, there's, whether it's political organizations, daily practices, ley lines, there's so many things you can look at history and the lore of what we have that could just be brought out. How do people use that to create more realism in their games?
That is a great question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We'll make sure to add it to the table. Well, thanks, Dave, for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, and appreciate it.
This has been Roll for Topic. Remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.